this at all? The antenna? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. I'm Bunny Summerlin, and I'm a substitute worship associate this morning here at Horizon. We are excited to welcome you into our worship service this morning. We're so glad to have you with us, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. Whether you've come here for the first time or whether you've been here for longer than you can remember. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome among us.
Good morning. So I think I see maybe some new faces among us. So I just want to remind you all of our process for sharing joys and sorrows, things that you might want to let the community know about. We have this lovely little bowl in front here where you see some candles, some pieces of paper, a pen. If there's a joy, a sorrow, something in between that you want to share with our community, I invite you to come forward during the service and place it in the bowl so that you might share with us, and we can share it during our time for prayer. Our call to worship this morning comes from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Savage. She writes, "Rejoice, rejoice with full hearts, beloved people of blessing. Rejoice. May this time of worship celebrate what we know at our core. Blessings are real and ours to claim and radiate. Blessings are abundant and ours to revel in and to pass along. Blessings are transformational and ours to be challenged by as we grow towards the faith we know we can be. Rejoice, and let us worship together."
We light our chalice with the words of Adrian Rich. "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." Please join me in our affirmation that is printed in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth, thus do we covenant together.
I invite you to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our opening hymn, "From You I Receive." It's number 402 in your gray hymnal.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
I'd like us now to join in singing the children to their classes, and you can follow Tina, this lovely lady here in the striped shirt. We come now to the time in our service where we share our gifts to sustain the ministries of this church. Our gifts will now be joyfully given and received.
Our first reading this morning is Reasons to Live Through the Apocalypse by Nikita Gill. Sunrises, people you have still to meet and laugh with. Songs about love, peace, anger, and revolution. Walks in the wood. The smile you exchange with a stranger when you experience beauty accidentally together. Butterflies. Seeing your grandparents again. The moon in all her forms, whether half or full. Dogs. Birthdays and half-birthdays. That feeling of floating in love. Watching birds eat from their feeders. The waves of happiness that follow the end of sadness. Brown eyes. Watching a boat cross an empty sea, dipping your feet in the river, balconies, cake. The wind in your face when you roll the car window down on an open highway. Falling asleep to the sound of a steady heartbeat. Warm cups of tea on cold days. Hugs. Night skies. Art museums. Books filled with everything you do not yet know. Long conversations. Long lost friends. Poetry.
We come now to the time in our worship service that we set aside for meditation and prayer. We'll share a moment of silence, hear the spoken prayers of our community, hear a written prayer, and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. I invite you to join me now in a moment of silence. We share this morning in the sorrows of our community. Our thoughts are with George Norwood, whose son Stephen died on Friday. We also share in sorrow for Lucy Lockwood, who suffered a third stroke and is in rehab for the next few weeks. Our thoughts are with them. Let us breathe together. Loving God, Spirit of life, mystery in which we live and move and have our being, draw near to us this morning and hear our prayers. We give thanks this morning for sunshine, for cool refuge here from the heat, for the entrance into summer, that we have come to see another season here on this earth. We give thanks for the ups and downs of life, for the hills and valleys, for all the twists and turns that brought us here this morning, to this group of people who aspire to love one another. We give thanks for all people, both here and gone from this life, who have gathered their courage and spoken truth to power. We give thanks for all those who have worked for change, knowing that we may never see it in our lifetime. Spirit, our hearts this morning are with all those who are grieving losses, both large and small, with all those who are navigating the uncertainty of life. Help us to remember that though there is no such thing as certainty, we can open ourselves to new possibilities, to new risks, to find a way to say yes to all that life has to offer. Remind us of the hidden goodness that may emerge if we give it time. Spirit, when the injustice of the world all feels too big, help us to breathe and to give ourselves over to all that we cannot control. Help us to focus on the little things that we can do rather than on all we cannot, This is how we will make change over a long time. For all these things and those held in the silence of our hearts, we pray. Amen. Please remain seated and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life, number 123. Our second reading this morning is called A Blessing for Risk Takers and Failures by the Reverend Robin Tanner. Today, we share in a blessing for losers, risk takers, all failures far and wide. Blessed are they who fall in the mud, who jump with gusto and rip the pants, who skin the elbows and bruise the ego. For they shall know the sweetness of risk. Blessed are they who make giant mistakes, whose intentions are good but impact has injured, who know the hot sense of regret and ask for mercy. For their hearts will know the gift of forgiveness. Blessed are they who have seen a D or an F or C or any letter less than perfect, who are painfully familiar with the red pen and the labels as less than, for they know the wisdom in the imperfect. Blessed are they who try again, who dust off, who wash up, who extend the wish for peace, who return to sites of failure, who are dogged in their pursuit, for they will discover the secret to dreams. Blessed are they who refuse to listen to the naysayers, for their hearts will be houses for hope. Blessed are they who see beyond the surface of another, for they will be able to delight in the gift of compassion. Blessed are they who stop running the race to help a fellow traveler, who pick up the fallen, who stop for injured life, for they shall know the kindness of strangers. Blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon winning, for they shall know the path of justice. Here ends the reading. So today is our second Sunday of our June theme, celebrating blessings. And last Sunday, we talked about blessings, about something that recognizes goodness within us, recognizes the goodness that is already there, rather than conferring some onto us. We talked about the idea of an original blessing rather than original sin, and brought in some process theology, the idea that there is a force at work that we work with that wants good things for us. And maybe, most important of all, we talked about that idea of hidden goodness that comes from the Jewish tradition, the idea that there is goodness even in the most painful parts of life, but that it may take us a lifetime to realize what that was or how or why. That through it all, the force for goodness in the universe still remains, even though bad things happen. And so today we are building on all that came before about blessing and taking that with us into this conversation about an ethic of risk. This topic is maybe a little different for me, more academic than I usually like, but I feel like this idea of adopting an ethic of risk is incredibly relevant to what we are doing now, to the practice of interim ministry. When I first arrived among you, I think in my very first sermon, I reminded you of some things, and I think it's time for that reminder again. Taking a risk by nature means at the very least opening oneself up to change. And all change, even change we want and welcome, can bring up things within us that we did not see coming. Often feelings of sadness and grief that hit us hard when we least expect them. Much of this grief, I am sure, is surrounding the losses experienced in the pandemic and the departure of Reverend Laura during that time. How painful that these were intertwined. It is still true, as I said at the beginning of this year, that I am not Laura, that I am a different person with a different voice that I bring to ministry, a different perspective, a different way of being in the world. I deeply respect and admire her ministry, and my responsibility is to be true to my own self and to make change where I can. In the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, change is constant. Be like water that has learned to flow. In a certain way, risk has been the backdrop of all of our lives for quite a while. Deciding what feels safe to do, weighing mental health versus physical health risk throughout pandemic times, this made more real what has always been true, described in the words of Mary Oliver. It is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world. I think that all of our lives are risky. Every decision is a risk. I took a risk to come here, and I invite you to imagine a time in your own life when you took a risk, when you were nervous, afraid. I am willing to bet that there are times when things turned out even better than you could have planned. I'm also thinking, when we talk about risks, of so many of our spiritual ancestors, from the early Unitarians in Europe to Universalists awash on our shores with a message of radical love, who took risks for what they believed in. I'm thinking of our more recent ancestors who answered the call to civil rights work and journeyed to Selma, Alabama, knowing the risks ahead. This is the thread of connection to Sharon Welch's work on a feminist ethic of risk. So many of those who came before us spent their lives advocating for change they knew they might not see in their lifetimes. Sharon Welch's work, A Feminist Ethic of Risk, was published more than 30 years ago, and yet the first words of her introduction posed the question: what does it mean to work for social transformation in the face of seemingly unsurmountable suffering and evil? I'm not sure whether it's horrifying or comforting to be reminded of the truth that we have all known for a long time, that people have always felt this way and probably always will. To choose the hopeful road, though, this means that people have forever been working for change, and there's no sign of stopping. Welch situates the inspiration for her writings in the power of story, citing the work of Toni Cade Bambara and her writings on the African American experience. Bambara said, "The natural response to oppression, to ignorance, to evil, and mystification is wide-awake resistance." The belief that the natural response to stress and crisis is not breakdown and capitulation, but transformation and renewal. Welch takes this idea that renewal in the face of oppression is possible and builds on it. In her words, "From those courageously facing and struggling against an oppression they have not yet fully overcome, we can learn how we too can join in the struggle against racism and persist in our work against other structural problems." She continues, "Such a situation as this one in which we live calls for an ethic of risk, an ethic that begins with the recognition that we cannot guarantee decisive changes in the near future or even in our lifetime. The ethic of risk is propelled by the equally vital recognition that to stop resisting, even when success is unimaginable, is to die. The death that accompanies acquiescence to overwhelming problems is multidimensional. The threat of physical death, the death of the imagination, the death of the ability to care. And here I am reminded of our first reading that Bunny read us earlier, Reasons to Live Through the Apocalypse. A reminder that to survive is not a given, and that also there are so many reasons still to care about the world. To survive requires a buy-in from us, requires us to get up close with life, requires that some part of us continues to tune in to all that is around us, rather than shutting down our ability to feel. The ethic of risk has 3 elements, each of which is essential to maintain resistance in the face of all that would tell us otherwise. A redefinition of responsible action, grounding in community, and strategic risk-taking. Responsible action doesn't mean that we fixate on a certain outcome. Part of the ethic of risk is understanding that it is in direct opposition to the idea that we can control everything. Rather, it means acting in such a way that further action is possible so that the work can continue. It means creating possibilities for new changes. So what does this mean for us, for our lives right now? Welch spends quite a bit of time kind of calling both out and in the middle class, reminding us that there are many people who look at all the problems of the world with a realistic worldview and think, I can't do anything about this. And so begins the journey toward doing nothing. Welch acknowledges the reasons we may feel this way. She writes, "The horizon of action is recognition that we cannot imagine how we will win. Acknowledgement of the immensity of challenge is a given. There are no national and international programs, no particular strategies that can convincingly guarantee that the many forces and structures of exploitation can be stopped. I think we have had to learn again and again that this isn't the way. We learned it in 2016, and frankly, all through the Trump presidency. We learned it again in 2020 with the height of the pandemic, with George Floyd's murder, and the refusal of anyone, it felt like, to accept some kind of accountability. And we live in cycles. Such is the nature of life. We go through periods of overwhelm, and then someone pulls us back into action. This ebb and flow, that is what keeps us going. Welch argues, I would say, that our role is to know that there are things we can't control, that there are no guarantees that we can fix the problems of the world, but that we will continue to try instead of doing nothing. Because people who came before us did the same, and we will do the same for future generations. To care about the people who come after us, to care about more than just ourselves and our own success, to realize the interconnectedness of all life is inherently in opposition to all that patriarchy has created. This is inherently feminist. So we need to try to keep an attitude of opposition, of righteous anger in the face of injustice. We hold the knowledge of the complexity of the problems facing us, and still that doesn't shut us down. As Sharon Welch writes, the overall tone is one of defiance. In the words of Tony Cade Bambara, we will need a sheer holy boldness. I find Welch's ideas about all we cannot control particularly compelling right now, especially in relationship to where we are in our rebuilding journey, as well as in relation to some of the ideas we've been working through this year around white supremacy culture. I have wondered at times if this idea of an ethic of risk could be part of an antidote to that way of being that asks us to strive for perfection at all times, to control everything around us, to literally try to be and do the impossible in ways that hurt us all. I have referred to the work of Adrienne Marie Brown again and again this year, as her work Emergent Strategy has become a kind of sacred text for me, especially when I first picked it up. As someone beginning a transitional ministry during a pandemic, it felt like it spoke to the challenge of the moment. And I'm not sure how to tell you this, but this has truly been a year of fool around and find out. This ethic of risk, this is what we have been doing together all along, all year. We have had to constantly hold an openness to the fact that things will not be as they were before, and being open to discovering what might work now, what we might try together, knowing it may or may not work, and knowing that failure will not be an indictment of character on any one person, but information about where we are, about this moment. We have had to consider what will allow us to keep taking action, to keep going. We talked a lot about that question at the beginning of the year, what is possible? And moved towards what might be possible. Adrienne Marie Brown teaches us to ask ourselves, what are all of your gifts? Are you living a life that honors all of your gifts? And she says this is one of the ways we can create more possibility. One thing that I think we have to acknowledge when talking about an ethic or maybe really a theology of risk is that with risks can also come mistakes, harm to ourselves or others, almost always unintentionally. And yet this is the thing about risk. This is the potential cost. This is what's at stake. Knowing all of this, we decide to go anyway. Adrienne Marie Brown points out, when the response to mistakes, failures, and misunderstandings is emotional, psychological, economic, and physical punishment, we breed a culture of fear, secrecy, and isolation. Instead, she offers that we begin with asking why and listening, truly listening to understand, with why as our framework. She says, people mess up. We lie, exaggerate, betray, hurt, and abandon each other. When we hear that something bad has happened, it makes sense to feel anger, pain, confusion, and sadness. But to move immediately to punishment means that we stay on the surface of what has happened. To transform the conditions of the wrongdoing, we have to ask ourselves and each other, why? Even, especially, when we are scared of the answer. Why is often a game-changing, possibility-opening question. That's because the answers rehumanize those we feel are perpetrating against us. Why often leads us to grief, abuse, trauma, often undiagnosed mental illnesses like depression or bipolar disorder, different socialization, childhood, scarcity, loneliness. Also, why makes it impossible to ignore that we might be capable of a similar transgression in similar circumstances? We don't want to see that. Demonizing is more efficient than relinquishing our worldviews, which is why we have slavery, Holocaust, lynchings, and witch trials in our short human history. Why is an evolutionary question. And it is easy to get stuck in all we cannot take on, in the one right way of doing things. But I would argue that this is the easy way out. In the words of Adrienne Marie Brown again, critique alone can keep us from having to pick up the responsibility of figuring out solutions. It's always easier to sit on the sidelines and offer suggestions. I heard one of you say this week that this is a church of redemption, and I think that is true. I share all of this writing on wrongdoing and on mistakes because church is messy. Life is messy. If we are to engage together in this work of risk-taking, of justice-making, we have to be grounded, as Welch reminds us, in community. And people say that a lot, but what I think that literally means is that you don't just decide that you want to save the world one day and try to go it alone. Instead, you take stock. You say to yourself, who are my people? Which communities am I a part of? And what is important to me and those people that I love? What do they need? And you choose something that means something to you to work on. Something in which you can make a small change in your little corner of the world. And you keep going with that attitude of defiance, with that righteous anger when necessary. You don't go it alone or try to make a show of all that you're doing. You try to draw people into the work beside you where you can. In the words of the reading we heard earlier from the Reverend Robin Wright, blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon winning, for they shall know the path of justice. And you hold in your heart all we have said about covenant, about a way back into relationship when one or more likely both parties have messed up and caused hurt. Trying to do anything difficult like justice work means that there will be intense feelings involved. The key is to remain grounded, to stay in relationship, to keep asking what our loved ones need from this world. Adrienne Rich wrote this poem about the challenges posed by society to loving another woman. But I think it speaks too so much to the challenges posed by trying to love life. She writes, "This we were. This is how we tried to love. And these are the forces they had ranged against us. And these are the forces we had ranged within us and against us and within us." So much of what has been said this morning may be obvious to you. In the time since Welch has written her work, so many have built on this idea of giving up control, detaching from outcome, considering what else might be possible. And these ideas have become part of my own personal theology, of the way that I try to do ministry. They've been here with us all year, running under the surface of our time together. At the same time, this is kind of the counterpoint to last week, an acknowledgement of all the evil in the world, an acknowledgement, in the words of Adrienne Rich again, my heart is moved by all we cannot save. And yet the blessing in my eyes is that we still have reason to try. The ethic of risk offers us an opposition to emotional and spiritual death, to the ability to care. Instead, it offers us a renewal of and re-engagement with life, a glimpse toward the eternal. So I wonder this morning, what risks might you be willing to take in the name of faith? What communities ground you? Who do you love and who loves you? And what is it that you can do to keep engaging, even on the hardest days, with life? I invite you to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, Just as Long as I Have Breath. It's number 6 in the gray hymnal.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I made my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment filled me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love.
We extinguish this flame, but not our commitment to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping to all to thrive in a just world.
So friends, my hope for you as we go forth from our time together this morning is that you stay defiant in the face of power and that you may continue to engage with life. Go in peace.